The billionaire faked an accident to test his wife, until the poor nurse exposed a secret that changed everything. "Sir, your heart rate is dropping. We need to act now." Those were the first words Elena Vasquez ever said to Damian Cole, not knowing he was watching her every move, testing her, calculating her worth. And she had no idea that those 7 words would destroy everything she thought she knew about her own life. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and quiet suffering. That was how Elena always described Mercy General to her younger brother, Marco, whenever he asked why she came home so tired every night. "It smells like people trying," she'd say, pulling off her worn sneakers at the door of their small 2-bedroom apartment in South Chicago. And sometimes failing. Elena Vasquez, 28 years old, had been a nurse for 4 years. She had student loan debt that made her stomach hurt when she thought about it too hard. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper. She bought her scrubs secondhand from a medical supply Facebook group. She had not taken a vacation in 3 years, not since her mother passed from breast cancer and left her as the sole provider for Marco, who was 17 and brilliant and deserved a future Elena was determined to give him. She was not the kind of woman who walked into rooms and made people stop talking. She was the kind of woman who kept rooms running. On the night of October 14th, a Tuesday, Elena was 40 minutes into a double shift when the ambulance bay doors burst open and paramedics wheeled in a man strapped to a gurney. His shirt was cut open. His face was pale but structured. Sharp jaw, expensive haircut even in its current disorder, hands that somehow looked too clean for someone who'd just been in a car accident. 33-year-old male. The paramedic called out, "Single vehicle collision on Lakeshore Drive, airbag deployed. Suspected internal trauma, BP dropping. Room 3, Elena said without hesitation, already moving. She didn't think about who he was. She didn't recognize the face that appeared on Forbes covers or business news chyrons. She saw a patient. She saw numbers on a monitor and a body that needed help. "Sir, can you hear me?" she said, leaning close. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was too controlled. Trained, almost, she noticed, but filed it away. Nurses developed instincts they didn't always have time to examine. "Sir, my name is Elena. You're at Mercy General. You're safe." His eyelids fluttered. "Can you tell me your name?" "Daniel," he said, his voice rough. A pause. Then, quieter. "My name is Daniel." She would later find out that was the first lie he told her. The next 6 hours were a controlled storm. Elena moved through them the way she always did. Competently, calmly, with a sharp word here and a steady hand there. She coordinated with the attending physician, Dr. Harmon, monitored vitals, pushed fluids, spoke to the patient in that measured tone she'd perfected for people who were scared, even when they were pretending not to be. At 3 in the morning, when the patient had been stabilized and moved to a private room, Elena finally sat down at the nurse's station with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Her colleague Britt slid into the seat beside her and said, in the hushed voice people use for gossip they can barely contain, "Do you know who that is in room 3? "Daniel," Elena said. Britt stared at her. "Alana, that is Damian Cole." Elena looked at her blankly. "Cole Industries. The guy who bought that skyscraper downtown just to tear it down and rebuild it taller. He's worth like $8 billion. His wedding was in vogue." Elena looked at her coffee. "His BP was 88/60 when he came in. I don't care what he's worth." Britt shook her head, laughing softly. "That's why you're my favorite person." But later, walking the corridor on her rounds, Elena paused outside room 3. Through the narrow window in the door, she could see the patient, Damian, apparently, sitting up slightly in his bed. He was not asleep, he was looking at the ceiling with an expression she recognized. Not pain, exactly. Something older than pain. She pushed the door open quietly. "You should be resting." He looked at her. In the low light of the hospital room, his eyes were darker than she expected. Gray, almost. With something calculating behind them that hadn't been there when he was performing his semi-consciousness earlier. "How long do you think before I can leave?" he asked. "That depends on what we find in your imaging," she said, checking his IV line without making eye contact. "You had significant impact. We don't joke about internal bleeding. I feel fine. Patients who feel fine are my most dangerous cases." She made a note on her tablet. "Your emergency contact listed a Vivian Cole. Your wife." Something shifted in his face. It was small. The way a door closes an inch and you feel the air change in the room. "Yes," he said. "Has anyone called her?" the front desk would have. She hasn't arrived yet. He nodded slowly, and there it was again, that expression. The one that wasn't quite pain. It's 4 in the morning, Elena added, softer than she intended. People take time to get here. She was home when it happened, Damien said. We'll live 20 minutes away. Elena didn't respond. It wasn't her place. She noted his vitals, adjusted his blanket with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and moved toward the door. You noticed, didn't you? He said suddenly. She stopped. When they brought me in. You noticed something was off. He wasn't asking. He was watching her the way people watch something they're trying to understand. Elena turned back slowly. I notice a lot of things, she said carefully. My job is to figure out which ones matter. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not the calculated thing, something more genuine underneath it, like a window opening. You're good at this, he said. I've been doing it a long time. You're young to say that. I grew up fast. She met his gaze evenly. Get some rest, Mr. Cole. We can talk about discharge in the morning. She left before he could say anything else. At 6:47 a.m., a woman arrived at the front desk wearing a silk blouse and heels that clicked against the linoleum like punctuation. Vivian Cole was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, maintained, precise, assembled. She spoke to the receptionist with the particular impatience of someone who believed waiting was something that happened to other people. Elena watched from the corridor as she was escorted to room 3. She stood outside only a moment, not long enough to hear anything, just long enough to see, through the narrow window, Vivian walk into her husband's room and stop near the door. Not rushing to his side. Not reaching for his hand. Just stopping, standing still and watching him the way you watch a problem you're trying to solve. Elena told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself she saw complicated marriages every week and projection was a dangerous game in this profession. She told herself to go finish her charting and let these people live their wealthy, incomprehensible lives without her opinions. She told herself all of that, but she couldn't stop thinking about Damien Cole's face when he said, she was home. We lived 20 minutes away, and she couldn't stop thinking about the feeling she'd had when she first examined him. That controlled breathing, those clean hands, that performance of unconsciousness. Something was happening in room 3. Something that had nothing to do with a car accident. She just didn't know yet that she was already part of it. Damien Cole had planned the accident down to the minute. He'd hired a firm, not a detective agency, something more discreet. And they had coordinated everything. The car, the controlled impact, the paramedics who were, in fact, real paramedics responding to a real call, because Damien wasn't reckless. He needed authentic chaos, authentic hospital admission, authentic fear responses from the people around him, including Vivian. Especially Vivian. He'd had suspicions for 4 months. It started with small things. A changed phone password, a dinner that ran 2 hours past its scheduled end, a perfume that wasn't hers clinging to the collar of a jacket she borrowed and returned. He'd hired the discreet firm in June. By September, they had given him photographs. He hadn't told anyone. Not his lawyer. Not his brother, James, who lived in Seattle and would have told him to burn everything down immediately. He'd sat with the photographs in his home office for 2 weeks, looking at them, thinking. He was a man who built companies by understanding people, by watching how they behaved under pressure, what they protected, what they sacrificed. He had learned, young and poor in a Cincinnati neighborhood that didn't produce many billionaires, that the truth about a person lived in their emergencies. So he created one. If Vivian rushed to his side, terrified and loving, maybe the photographs were misleading. Maybe context existed that he hadn't found. Maybe 4 years of marriage and the life they'd built together deserved the benefit of his doubt. If she didn't, well, he would know. He'd been awake in the ambulance. He'd monitored everything through the carefully constructed haze of a man pretending to drift in and out of consciousness. He'd heard the paramedics, the intake team, the rustle and urgency of the ER. And he'd heard Elena Vasquez. What caught him first was the absence of panic in her voice. Not detachment. He understood the difference. Detachment was distance. What Elena had was something else, a centeredness that came from someone who had stood in rooms like this before and decided, somewhere along the way, that falling apart wasn't an option they could afford. He recognized it because he'd built the same thing in himself, from the same kind of necessity. She'd noticed the controlled breathing. He'd seen the flicker of it in her eyes. There and gone, professional reflex suppressing personal observation. Most people would have dismissed it. She filed it away, the way careful people file things they aren't sure about yet. That made her dangerous. Not dangerous to him. He would clarify that to himself later, much later, when the whole architecture of this week came down around him. At this moment, lying in the hospital bed at 4 in the morning, listening to the facility settle into its nighttime rhythms, dangerous meant something simpler. She was paying attention. Real attention, not performed attention. He wasn't used to that from people in his life anymore. When she'd come in to check on him, he hadn't planned to say anything. But he'd been lying there since midnight with nothing but the ceiling and his own thoughts, which had arrived at the particular dark territory they always found when he was alone and honest with himself. The territory where he admitted that the photographs hadn't just made him angry. They'd made him grieve. Because whatever Vivian was or wasn't, he had loved the idea of her. He had loved the version of the future they were building. He'd bought the house on the North Shore because she'd pointed at a picture in a magazine once and said, someday. He'd remembered. He'd made it happen. That was the language he knew. Turning someday into a deed of sale. He hadn't known that while he was doing all of it, she was elsewhere, building something different. You noticed, didn't you? He'd said to Elena. He hadn't planned it. It came out of the place where calculated men sometimes accidentally tell the truth. She hadn't answered directly. But she also hadn't pretended not to understand the question. She saw him. Not Damien Cole of Cole Industries, not the Forbes cover, not the hospital patient performing distress. She saw the person in the room, and she looked at him with the steady, measuring eyes of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by things that didn't matter. He found himself thinking about that as dawn came through the window in thin gray light. At 60:47, he heard heels on linoleum. The distinctive rhythm of them, confident, unhurried, reached him before the door opened. When Vivian walked in, she was wearing the silk blouse he'd given her for her birthday. Her dark hair was perfect. Her face was composed and concerned in precise measure. Damien. She came to his side, touched his face with cool fingers. God, I got here as fast as I could. I know, he said. You look pale. I'm okay. She sat in the chair beside his bed and held his hand. And she was warm and present and worried, looking, and a man who didn't have photographs sitting in a locked drawer in his home office might have believed every millimeter of it. Damien looked at his wife's face. He thought about Vivian pointing at that magazine photo. The house with the white stone exterior and the lake view and the garden that caught afternoon light like something from a painting. He thought about the photographs in the drawer. Vivian, he said quietly. Her thumb moved in small circles on the back of his hand. I'm glad you made it. She smiled at him. It reached her eyes perfectly. She had always been good at that. Of course, she said. Where else would I be? He almost said it. The question was right there, honest and sharp, ready to cut through 4 months of careful strategy and get to the raw material underneath. But the door opened and Elena stepped in to check his morning vitals, and the moment dissolved, and Damien Cole looked at the nurse with her secondhand scrubs and her steady hands and her eyes that filed things away for later. And he thought, she's gonna figure it out. He didn't know yet whether that was a problem or the only honest thing in this room. Elena was not supposed to be assigned to Damien Cole past Tuesday morning. Mercy General's system rotated patients by floor and shift, and by Wednesday she should have been back on the 3rd floor with her regular rotation. But Dr. Harmon, who was particular about continuity of care for complex cases, had flagged the Cole admission as needing consistent nursing oversight. The patient is guarded, he'd told the charge nurse. He responds to Vasquez. Keep her on it for the week. Elena had found out via the updated schedule board. She had stood in front of it for a long moment and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not reluctance. Exactly. More like the feeling before you step onto a rope bridge. The awareness that the ground beneath you has changed in nature. She was professional. She administered his medications on schedule, reviewed his imaging results with Dr. Harmon, answered his questions about the mild liver contusion the scans had found. Genuine, as it turned out, a real finding from the engineered impact, which gave Elena a complicated feeling she refused to examine too deeply. What she could not do was stop noticing things. Vivian Cole came each afternoon for approximately 90 minutes. She brought things: fresh flowers, a cashmere blanket, a book Damien never opened. She sat near his bed and spoke in the warm, attentive tone of a dedicated wife. She asked about his pain levels, his appetite, his sleep. She never touched his hand twice. Elena had noticed this on Wednesday and dismissed it. On Thursday she noticed it again and could not dismiss it. In her experience, people who loved each other reached out reflexively. Second touches, casual contact, the small unconscious annexations of someone you trusted with your body. It didn't mean the absence of love. People expressed care differently. Elena knew this. But there was something else. Something in the way Vivian's eyes moved when she was in the room. They catalogued. They assessed. They checked Damien's face the way you check a structure for weakness. Elena caught herself cataloging Vivian and made herself stop. On Thursday afternoon, when Vivian had gone and Damien was sitting up reading something on a tablet, Elena came in for his 4 o'clock check and he said, "Without looking up, you watch her." Elena didn't pause. "I observe everyone in my patient's room." "That's a careful answer." "I'm a careful person." She wrapped the BP cuff around his arm. 120/78. "Good. Better than yesterday." She made her note. "How's the pain?" "Managed." "A beat." "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked at him. "Depends on the question." "How long have you been doing this?" 4 years. "And before that?" "School. Before that, taking care of my mother." She kept her voice even. "She was sick for a long time. I learned medicine the hard way before I learned it the formal way." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you're good at it?" "I'm good at it because I paid attention and I don't give up easily." She capped her pen. "Why?" "I'm trying to understand you," he said simply. The directness of it stopped her. Most patients didn't say things like that. And the ones who did usually meant it differently, with a different kind of interest. This felt like something else. Like the way he'd said you noticed. Factual almost. Like he was logging data. "I'm not that complicated," she said. "I doubt that." He set down his tablet. "You work doubles regularly. You're on your feet for 12+ hours and you're still sharp at the end. You don't complain. You don't perform warmth. You just have it. That's not a job. That's a vocation. Or debt," she said. Before she could stop herself, he looked at her. She looked at the floor, then back up. She wasn't someone who backed down from the things she said. "I have significant student loans. And I support my brother. I work doubles because I have to." "That doesn't explain why you're good at it," he said. "Plenty of people work hard jobs they hate." She picked up her tablet, preparing to leave. "Mr. Cole, Damien, I appreciate the observation, but I'm not here to be understood. I'm here to make sure you leave this hospital healthier than you arrived. And if I told you," he said carefully, "that I wasn't entirely sure how I arrived." The room went still in the particular way rooms did when something true entered them. Elena turned back slowly. She looked at him. Really looked. The way she'd been restraining herself from doing since Tuesday morning. His face was open in a way it hadn't been. The calculation was still there. It was structural, she was beginning to understand, baked into how he moved through the world. But behind it was something the raw. "Then I'd say," she said slowly, "that whatever you're doing, someone could get hurt." "Yes," he agreed. "Including you." He held her gaze. "Special to me." She should have left. She had 4 other patients, a medication round in 20 minutes, a colleague covering her on a technicality who was already running thin. "The imaging was real," she said. "The liver contusion is real. Whatever the circumstances were, the injury is genuine, and you need to take it seriously." "I know. And whatever is happening in your personal life," she stopped. "Breathe. It's not my business." "I know that too." She nodded once and left. But in the corridor, walking fast toward the nurse's station, she pulled up her tablet and did something she almost never did. She Googled a patient. Damien Cole. Cole Industries. $8 billion. Married 4 years to Vivian Ashworth Cole, former brand director, philanthropist, frequently photographed. She scrolled through ImageFX, charity events. The wedding that Britt had mentioned, featured in Vogue. Damien in a navy suit, Vivian in something ivory and architectural. Both of them smiling. She looked at his smile in the photographs. Polished, present. And then thought about the expression she'd seen on his face at 4 in the morning when he said she was home. "We live 20 minutes away." Then she stopped scrolling, put her phone away, and went to do her job. She did not look him up again. What she did do, And this was the part she could not explain, the part she would return to later in the long unraveling of everything. Was notice, on Friday morning, a man in the visitor's corridor. He was not dressed like a visitor. He wore a dark jacket and kept his posture deliberately casual in the way that people trained in observation learn to carry themselves in public. He was looking at his phone. He was also watching room 3. When Elena came off her break and walked past him, he glanced up. Just a flicker, and then back down. She recognized the look. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where you learned fast what kinds of attention meant what. He was watching the room. And he wasn't there for the patient. She clocked out at 7 Friday morning and drove home through the gray Chicago dawn, thinking about a man with clean hands and controlled breathing, a wife who never touched him twice, and a stranger in a dark jacket in the corridor of the 3rd floor. She told herself it had nothing to do with her. She was wrong. And somewhere, in the quiet machinery of a plan Damian Cole had set in motion weeks earlier, she had just become the most important variable he hadn't accounted for. The man in the dark jacket was named Roy Finch. Elena didn't know this on Friday morning. She found out on Saturday, at 20:15 a.m., when she came back for her weekend overnight shift and found him in the stairwell outside the 3rd floor with a cell phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the low, deliberate cadence of someone giving a report. She wouldn't have thought twice about it. She'd mistaken him for hospital security before she placed him. Except that as she pushed the stairwell door open, she caught 2 words before he clicked off the call. "She's here." He looked at Elena, she looked at him. "Sorry," he said, with the reflexive pleasantness of someone trained to default to pleasantness. "Didn't mean to block the door." "It's a stairwell," Elena said. "It's fine." She went through to the floor. But she felt his eyes on her back until the door swung shut, and she thought about those 2 words with the particular fixation of someone who had spent years learning that small things matter. "She's here." Who was she? Vivian. Elena herself. Some third person Elena hadn't identified yet. She was still turning it over at 3 a.m. when her shift quieted and she made her rounds. When she reached room 3, she knocked softly and pushed the door open. And found Damian Cole sitting on the edge of his bed, fully dressed in clothes someone had clearly brought him, holding his phone in both hands, staring at the screen. He looked up. His face did the thing where the calculation and the rawness lived in the same expression. "You shouldn't be out of bed," Elena said. "I need to go." "Mr. Cole." "Damian." He said it with more force than before. "Please." She stepped into the room and let the door close behind her. "You were discharged for Monday. The contusion needs." "I know what it needs." He set down his phone. "Something's happened. I need to leave." "Is there an emergency?" He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the hospital hummed its nighttime frequency. Distant PA systems, the low roll of a cart, the breath of a building managing its hundreds of quiet dramas. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat. She would not be able to explain later why she did it. Why she didn't redirect to Dr. Harmon. Why she didn't call the charge nurse. Something in the room had weight to it. The kind of weight that meant a person was about to say something true. "The accident wasn't an accident," Damian said. The words landed cleanly, without drama. Elena was quiet for 3 seconds. "I know," she said. He blinked. "You know?" "I suspected Tuesday night." She kept her voice steady. "Controlled breathing in a trauma patient, no dirt or abrasion under the fingernails consistent with a steering wheel grip during impact, and your pupils responded too symmetrically for someone with the described level of head involvement." She paused. "I filed it away because my job is to treat the injury, not the circumstances." He stared at her. Something moved through his face. Not quite surprise, because she had the sense he didn't fully surprise easily. "A recalibration." "I staged it," he said. "To test my wife." Elena absorbed this. "I had evidence that she was." He stopped, started again. "I had photographs. I needed to know if she was real. And..." The pause was long enough to be its own answer. "She came," he said. "She was perfect." Another pause, which somehow made it worse. Elena thought about Vivian's cataloging eyes, the measured warmth, the single touch. "There's a man," Elena said carefully, "who has been in the corridors of this floor since Wednesday. Dark jacket, mid-40s, watching your room." Damian went absolutely still. "He was on the phone at 2:15 this morning," she continued. "In the stairwell. He said she's here, and ended the call when he saw me." Damian picked up his phone. She watched him type something fast. Not a message, she thought. More like a command. Roy Finch, he said quietly, as if to himself. You know him. He works for me. He set down the phone. A muscle moved in his jaw. Or he did. Something rearranged itself in Elena's understanding of the room. He was supposed to be monitoring the situation, Damien said. Providing updates on. He stopped. Pressed his fingers to his mouth for a moment. A gesture she recognized as someone stopping themselves from saying something they weren't ready to say yet. On Vivian's movements. Whether she contacted anyone while she was here. And instead he's reporting to someone else. Damien looked at her. Yes. The word sat between them with the particular stillness of confirmed suspicion. Who else knew about the staged accident? Elena asked. 2 people. My assistant, Marcus, who coordinated logistics. He paused. And my brother James. James came to me last week, told me I needed to end the investigation, let it go, move on. His voice was carefully flat. He was very insistent. Elena turned this over. And Finch. Finch was hired through a firm James recommended. The silence that followed was the kind that comes when things that were separate connect. Damien. Elena said quietly. What's in those photographs? He looked at her for a long moment. She had the strange feeling that he was deciding something. Not about her trustworthiness, which she sensed he'd already catalogued and filed, but about himself. About whether he was the kind of person who said out loud the things that hurt most. My wife, he said, and my brother. A breath, for at least 8 months. The room absorbed it. Elena thought about Vivian's careful performance at the bedside. About James, somewhere in Seattle, insisting his brother let it go. About Roy Finch in the stairwell saying she's here to someone who wasn't Damien Cole. They know about the setup. Elena said, they must. His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something grinding. They've known. Possibly since before it happened. He looked up at her. Which means the past week. Vivian coming here every day, being the perfect worried wife, wasn't for me. It was to manage information, Elena said. Yes. He stood, and she saw it cost him something. The contusion was real, the pain was real, even if the accident wasn't. I have to leave. I have to get ahead of this before. Before what? He stopped. Damien. She stood too because the moment required it. Before what? Coal Industries has a board vote in 9 days, he said. Significant restructuring. James is on the board. If he has information about my personal instability, a staged accident, a hospitalization, evidence that I'm surveilling my own wife. He stopped. It could be used to push a competency challenge. Elena stared at him. That's what this is, he said, and for the first time his voice cracked, just slightly, at the edge. Not just a marriage. The whole thing. The company I spent 12 years building. He pressed a hand over his ribs, and she didn't know if it was the contusion or something else. Has been planning this for a long time. She should have called the charge nurse. She should have stepped back into the professional boundary she'd maintained for 4 days. She should have remembered that this was not her life and not her war. Instead, Elena Vasquez, who had grown up fast and learned to trust her instincts in rooms where falling apart wasn't an option, looked at a man who was very powerful and very alone, and in the specific kind of danger that came from trusting the wrong people, and she made a decision. You need documentation, she said. Medical records showing the contusion is genuine. That protects you if anyone claims the hospitalization was fabricated for sympathy or theater. You need it time-stamped and certified before you leave. She moved toward the door. I can have Dr. Harmon sign off on an emergency discharge summary tonight. He looked at her. Why would you do that? She paused with her hand on the door. Because Roy Finch said she's here when I came through that door, she said. Which means at some point in the last 4 days, I became part of whatever this is. She met his eyes. I'd rather be useful than irrelevant. She left to find Dr. Harmon. Behind her, in room 3, Damien Cole sat back down on the edge of the bed and looked at the space where she'd been standing. In his 12 years of building things, he had learned to recognize the particular quality of someone who kept rooms running. He was beginning to understand that he had never needed that quality more than right now. By Sunday morning, Damien Cole had been discharged. A certified medical record sat in a secure file with his attorney, and Elena had returned to her regular rotation on the 3rd floor. The week should have been over. Then Roy Finch found her in the parking garage at 7:10 a.m. He appeared beside her car with his casual posture and his practiced pleasantness, and he said, Ms. Vasquez, I'd like to speak with you for a moment. Alina looked at him with the steadiness she had built over years in rooms where steadiness was the only tool available. "How do you know my name?" "I know quite a bit about you," he said. His tone was friendly in the specific way of people who want you to understand that friendliness is a choice they could revoke. "Student loans, approximately 94,000. Brother Marco, 17, enrolled at Lincoln High. You've been working doubles for about 8 months. The parking garage was quiet. It was early, and the morning shift hadn't fully turned over. Elena held her keys and kept her breathing even. "What do you want?" she asked. "Just to understand the nature of your relationship with Damien Cole." He tilted his head. "You provided him with documentation Thursday night. Spoke with his attorney's office." A pause. "That's a significant step outside standard nursing duties. I'm not going to discuss a patient's care with you." "Of course." He smiled. "I just want to make sure you understand that certain people are watching how this situation develops. People who have significant resources." He looked at her car. The cracked bumper, the age of it, the simple arithmetic of her life expressed in paint and metal. "And certain people have interests in making sure the situation resolves cleanly." It was not a threat. It was the architecture of a threat, a framing, the foundation, the space where a threat would go. "Are you telling me to stay out of it?" Elena asked. "I'm suggesting you think about what you have to lose," he said pleasantly, "versus what you have to gain from someone else's problems." He walked away. His shoes were very quiet on the concrete. Elena sat in her car for 4 minutes, not starting it. Then she took out her phone and found the number Damien had given her, pressed into her hand with a quiet "in case you need anything" as he left. And she texted, "Finch approached me in the parking garage. Mentioned Marco by name." The response came in 40 seconds, "Are you safe?" She stared at the question. It was such a simple question. In the architecture of the week, the photographs, the board vote, the brothers' betrayal, the elaborate machinery of power and money grinding against itself, it was such a simple question. "Are you safe?" "Yes," she typed. "But I think you should know what he said." "He called instead of texting," she answered. "Tell me exactly what he said." His voice was different on the phone, less managed, the edges sharper. She told him, word for word. She was good at that. She'd learned early that precise recall was a form of protection. When she finished, there was a pause. "Elena." His voice was careful. "I need to tell you something I should have told you Thursday." She waited. "When I found the photographs," he said, "there was something else. Something I haven't told anyone because I didn't understand what it meant yet." Another pause. "The dates on the photographs go back 22 months. Vivian and James." He stopped. "But there were other documents in the file. Financial documents. Transfers that my firm identified as part of the same investigation." His voice was very controlled now, the way hers got when she was holding something difficult. Marco's college fund was set up 14 months ago through a charitable account linked to Cole Industries' community program. The parking garage was very quiet. "Vivian runs the community program," Damien said. Elena processed this slowly, the way you process something when the full weight of it is too large to arrive all at once. "She donated to my brother's college fund," Elena said. "It would have appeared anonymous to you," Damien said. "Wrote it through the foundation." "I don't think." He stopped, started again. "I don't know if you were a target. I don't know if it was meant to create leverage, or if Vivian genuinely." He didn't finish. Elena thought about Marco, 17 and brilliant, who had come home 8 months ago with a letter about a college scholarship she'd cried over in the kitchen when he wasn't looking. The anonymous foundation grant she'd called the hospital's social worker about to make sure was legitimate. The social worker who'd confirmed the charitable organization was registered and above board. She thought about Roy Finch knowing her loan amount to the dollar, knowing Marco's name in school. She thought about how the week had felt like being slowly walked onto a rope bridge. "Is the money still in the account?" she asked. "Yes. It's legitimately his." "I want to be clear about that, I'm not." "How do I know that?" A pause. She heard him understand what she was asking. "Not is the money real, but how do I know you're not doing the same thing? How do I know this isn't another kind of test?" "You don't," he said. "I can give you documentation and you can verify it independently, but at some level you're going to have to make a judgment." Another pause. "I understand if you decide this isn't worth it." She sat with that. Outside the parking garage, Chicago was waking up in its gray Marchway. Traffic building. the distant rhythm of the city's enormous ordinary life. She thought about what Roy Finch had said. What you have to lose versus what you have to gain from someone else's problems. But the thing Finch didn't understand. The thing about growing up fast in a house where things were hard and stakes were real, was that Elena Vasquez had never decided what to do based on what she stood to gain. She decided based on what was true. And the truth was that a man had been betrayed by his wife and his brother and was 9 days from losing the company he'd spent 12 years building. And a woman who worked in the same operation had used an anonymous foundation to create a connection to Elena that now looked, in a certain light, like a leash. And Elena did not accept leashes. "Tell me what you need," she said. The coal industries board meeting happened on a Wednesday. Elena was not in the room. She was in a supply closet on the 3rd floor of Mercy General, sitting on an overturned equipment crate with her phone, receiving updates in real time from Damien's attorney, a sharp-voiced woman named Patricia Cho who had taken Elena's testimony by video call on Monday and said, in the tone of someone who respected precision, "You're very good at this." What Elena had given Patricia Cho was simple: her account of Roy Finch's stairwell conversation, time-stamped by the hospital's security camera system, cross-referenced with Finch's employee record at Coal Industries, which Damien had accessed and found 3 flagged anomalies in expense reports that now looked like payments routed back to James Cole. She had also provided her own nursing record of the week, documenting timeline, patient interactions, and the discharge summary, demonstrating that Damien's hospitalization was medically supervised and legitimate, not theater. It was not dramatic evidence. It was documented, verified, precise. As Patricia Cho had said, "Nuff." The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Elena finished a full shift, went home, showered, ate something she didn't taste, and sat on her couch with her phone until 6:17 p.m. when her screen lit up with Damien's name. "It's done," he said. She closed her eyes. The vote, motion to challenge competency, was withdrawn before it reached the floor. "James?" A pause. James resigned from the board. His voice on resigned had the specific weight of a word that meant something larger than its definition. "Vivian and I we're separating. My attorneys are handling it." Another pause, longer. "Roy Finch has been referred to the state's attorney." Elena sat with the quiet. "Elena." His voice changed. The managed tone, the careful control. It was still there, because she didn't think it could fully leave him. It was structural. But underneath it was something unheld. "I want to say something, and I need you to let me say it without redirecting. Okay?" she said. "I've built things my whole life," he said. "Companies, structures, systems. I'm good at it. But I've been doing it by treating people as variables, as factors to calculate and account for." A breath. "I calculated Vivian. I calculated the accident. I was going to calculate my way through the entire marriage and the entire investigation, and come out the other side with a solution." She didn't speak. She let him say it. "You didn't let me do that to you," he said. "Every time I tried to figure you out, you just stayed yourself. Told me about the debt before I could be generous about it. Left before I could make the conversation about me." A pause. "In that parking garage you could have taken Finch's implication and walked away and been safe, and that would have been the logical thing." "It would have." Elena agreed. "Why didn't you?" She thought about it honestly. "Because he mentioned my brother," she said. "And the moment someone does that, they've made it personal. And I don't walk away from personal." A long pause. "Marco," Damien said. "The foundation money. I've had it transferred to an independent trust. Patricia has the documentation. It's completely clean and fully his, no connection to Coal Industries or Vivian's program. His to use or not use." A pause. "I want to be clear, there were no conditions. There never should have been conditions." Elena was quiet. She thought about Marco's face when the letter came. How he'd stood in the kitchen and read it twice and then said, "Elena, I think I can actually go." "Thank you," she said. Simply. "I want to ask you something," Damien said, "and this one you can redirect." "Go ahead." "I'm restructuring several things." His voice was careful but direct. "One of the Cole Foundation programs, the genuine ones, the Hospital Community Partnership, has been mismanaged under Vivian's oversight for the past 2 years. I need someone to run the clinical integrity side of it. Someone who understands what actual need looks like, who doesn't perform care but has it." A pause. "It's a real job, competitive salary." "I'm not." He stopped. "I'm not trying to manage you. I'm trying to ask if you'd be interested." Elena looked around her apartment. The worn couch, the clean floors, the photo of her mother on the shelf above the television, the coffee table where she and Marco did homework together on the nights he had hard problems, and she had something left after work. She thought about what Britt had said that first night. "That's why you're my favorite person." She thought about her mother, sick for so long, and the way Elena had learned medicine in that house, not as information but as devotion. The hard way before the formal way. "I'd need to keep my nursing license active," she said. "I'm not leaving the clinical side." The position would include a clinical component. "I'll have Patricia send the actual terms and you can have your own attorney review them." "I don't have an attorney." "You'll want one," he said. "I'll refer you to someone independent. No connection to coal industries. Your call entirely." She recognized this. He was being deliberately careful not to make her a variable. It cost him something, she could hear it. The instinct to manage, to arrange, to calculate, restraining itself. "Send the terms," she said. "Okay." A pause. "Elena." "Yeah. For what it's worth, and I know this doesn't balance any ledger, I'm sorry that you got pulled into this, that your brother's name was in a file somewhere, that a stranger in a parking garage knew your loan amount." His voice was even, but the weight in it was real. "You didn't deserve any of that." She thought about the first morning, standing outside room 3 at 4 a.m., watching Vivian stand in the doorway and assess her husband's face for weakness. She thought about she was home. "We live 20 minutes away. None of us get to choose which rooms we walk into," Elena said. "We just choose what we do once we're there." A long pause. "Yeah," Damien said. "I think that's right." They said goodbye without drama, and Elena set her phone on the coffee table and looked at the room. The ordinary, honest room, with its photographs and its worn furniture and its dignity. 20 minutes later Marco came home from school with his backpack over one shoulder, said, "What's for dinner?" and then looked at her face and said, "You okay?" "Yeah," Elena said. "I think I am." He watched her for a moment the way 17-year-olds watch the adults they've grown up trusting, reading the frequency. "Something happened," he said. "Something happened," she agreed. "The good kind. The complicated kind." She stood and went to the kitchen, set the table. "I'll tell you about it." He set the table. She told him. Not everything, but the shape of it. A man who staged his own test and found it didn't tell him what he thought it would. A woman who ran a program that touched lives in ways she didn't know about. A week that became a different week than anyone planned. Marco listened the way he always listened. Quietly, carefully, taking it in. "So the billionaire is going to be okay?" he asked. "He's going to have to rebuild some things," Elena said. "But yeah, he's capable. And you." Marco looked at her. "You're okay." Elena thought about the rope bridge. How you stepped onto it, felt the ground change, kept moving, reached the other side, and found it held. "I'm okay," she said. "I've always been okay." He smiled at that, a small smile that looked like their mother's. "Yeah," he said. "You kind of have." She put the food on the table. Outside, Chicago settled into its evening, enormous and ordinary and entirely indifferent, the way cities are. All those rooms running simultaneously, all those people choosing what to do once they're inside them. Elena Vasquez sat down to dinner with her brother. The story, as far as she was concerned, was just beginning.